young people starting out in their careers, maybe a couple of years in, and there does seem to be a common theme that a lot of them they're not enjoying work. And the common theme seems to be lack of leadership, lack of management, lack of understanding of what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how it fits into the big picture. And you're right, I've seen that. I've seen businesses that devise very sophisticated graduate recruitment schemes to bring in the best, but the best expect the best, and then it doesn't live up to their expectations. They're not given any autonomy. They're not given any inputs. They're just told to sit there and do a task. It's how does he fit into the bigger picture? It isn't just I've done my job. It's how have I contributed to that bigger goal?
Driving productivity, holiday activity like Christmas electricity, gifts wrapped to infinity.
Welcome to Driving Productivity. I'm here today with the amazing Howard. I'm Harjit. We're going to talk about how we take what the board's decided or what leadership are trying to push through into an organisation, how we embed that really at front of house level and in all the layers of an organisation. But before we get into that, Howard, and welcome to the Christmas special as well.
Thanks, Harj. Yes. Special effort with our attire today.
Howard, credentials.
Okay. So I qualified as a chartered accountant 30 years ago. As of 2025, hard to believe, I know. Must be my skincare regime. Then after that, so the last 30 years, I've worked in a variety of different businesses. So I've worked for large corporates. I've worked for private equity-backed businesses, private businesses. I have been through the CFO role, then moved on to Chief Operating Officer, Managing Director of businesses and Regional Managing Director. Worked all over Europe, spent a lot of time traveling, and this was mainly in professional services, financial services and IT reselling businesses.
Wow. Okay. So lots of experience, not just in terms of finance, but actually managing people, managing projects, trying to get those projects delivered. And in that time, I guess you've gained a lot of lived experience, which you could probably marry up with some of the reading that you've probably done in the past 30 odd years as well. Before we get into the thick of it, tell me about you. What do you do outside of work to relax? What's your thing?
So I'm now trying to learn golf. So better late than never. But that's been quite interesting, actually. We'll come to that a bit later on, that my golf coach is setting up an online business and I've been helping him with that. So we'll touch on that later and how, you can learn life through learning golf. But so that at the moment is my half pleasure, half pain of my spare time. I'm learning that with my son, which is great. So that's a great, bonding experience. But no, that's the key at the moment. Very, very frustrating. Your good days, bad days, one step forward, one step back. A bit like learning to drive. You can master one thing and then they say, right, now do this. And the whole thing falls apart and you start all over again.
Well, I did used to play golf. I haven't played for a very long time, but I did have a sub 10.
Oh, really?
So there you go.
Oh.
Yeah.
I can only aspire to that.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, so let's get into it. Tell me what your keen area of interest is. This podcast is all about productivity, but as we know, there's a lot of elements under the umbrella of productivity. So what's the thing that you want to talk through today?
Sure. Well, I think, we spoke about this before, that there's a lot of different things we could have spoken about and that we've experienced through the years and we've, touched on. But so today I want to talk about how a board effectively communicates its goals down to the staff and make sure those goals are actually executed, which really is, does the board know what the staff are doing? Do they know what does the staff know what they're doing? And does it actually get done the way that it's expected? And I guess the reason why I've chosen this is twofold. So I've been speaking recently to a lot of young people starting out in their careers, maybe a couple of years in, and there does seem to be a common theme that a lot of them they're not enjoying work. And the common theme seems to be lack of leadership, lack of management, lack of understanding of what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how it fits into the big picture, which I think has always been important, but for people today is even more important to be part of something, part of a vision, part of a tribe, if you like. They want to add value.
It's really interesting that Gallup did a survey, and in that survey they've found, or they suggest, that up to 80% of staff do not feel engaged because they do not understand what the purpose of the organisation is and what's required of them to support that purpose.
Yeah.
It's a huge number.
It's massive, and you see it time and again. But also conversely, I've been speaking to a lot of leaders, and they're frustrated that when they agree strategies, goals, policies at board level, those things don't actually seem to filter down to the ground level in the way that they expect. So it's a kind of top-down and a bottom-up frustration that we're seeing.
And for SMEs, that board could be quite small. A lot of that responsibility could fall on fewer people, because in corporates you have more people doing different roles.
Yeah.
In SMEs, a lot of that responsibility falls on either the founder of the organisation or a few people. So it's really important that we still dig into that. And actually, interestingly, our friends at McKinsey, they ran a survey, and they associated 70% of change failure to a lack of good communication. And of course, when communication is done well, it's authentic, it's internalised, and actually, the way that's communicated is so important, because that's how you build intrinsic motivation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's not just, as you say, the motivation is a big part of it. It's a big part of the making someone feel engaged, come to work enjoying what they do, feeling they're part of something. But also the actual knock-on effect for, a company's hired someone, they're paying them money. Are they actually getting the value for money out of that person? Which I think at the moment, in a lot of cases, they're not. And that then can lead to low productivity, high staff turnover, people leaving with a bitter taste in their mouth, possible work stress issues, all those things, because people are frustrated. And, most people really do want to try and do a good job. And,
absolutely.
They're just not being allowed to do that in many cases today.
Harvard Business Review talk about productivity, and they attribute a 20 to 25% deficit as a result of poor communication and poor engagement. So it is really important. It's a critical factor, isn't it? But you and I have seen this done so badly on so many occasions. So do you want to share examples around what you've seen, what you've learned, and perhaps how you've tackled it in your position as MD in some of the organisations you work with?
Sure. Okay. Well, I guess if I give an example of what good goal cascading is and good engagement with an employee. So let's take the classic example of President Kennedy visiting NASA in the 1960s, and he walks up to a guy who's sweeping the floor and says, "What's your job, sir?" And the guy says, "I'm helping to put a man on the moon." So, and that's perfect, isn't it? So that guy knows clearly, he knows what he's doing, why he's doing it, and how it contributes to that bigger picture. Whereas, it could have just been the case his manager said to him, "Right, there's a bucket and a mop. Your job is mop that floor twice a day. End of." But they didn't. They went that bit further to say, okay, well, this is why you're mopping that floor, because we want a clean, positive environment. We want an environment that's free of slips and trips hazards, because that could endanger people, and have an impact on the mission. So he knew why he was doing that and how it fitted into that bigger picture and how he was contributing to that key goal. And I think these days, a lot of that is missing. So the feedback I'm getting from people is it's the equivalent of being told, there's the mop and bucket. Your job is mop the floor.
Well, there's the computer and your workflow, and off you go. Yeah, it's so true. And it has so many different sort of tentacles, doesn't it? That example that you've used, it's a basic example. Often people use it, but you'll have seen that in real life, when you've worked in some of the companies you work with. For me, I've been in organisations where that communication is so poor that people don't even know what they're doing. They do their little bit, they pass it down to somebody else who does another bit, and that end-to-end isn't visible. But when that end-to-end is visible and people know that they're contributing to something useful and worthwhile, there's more engagement, there's a greater likelihood of innovation and creativity. But that lack of communication, that simple thing, can make it so that people hang the brain at the door and don't engage in their work, lower productivity, more errors, poorer service, actually low engagement, and then organisations get into these pulse surveys or annual engagement surveys, which usually tell them nothing because they're using a mechanism to speak to the people rather than actually speaking to the people.
Yeah, and you're not tapping into their ideas and their talents, because unless they know the bigger picture, they can't really add to the task. So let's take our NASA example again. You take that one step further, and the cleaner says, well, okay, so if your goal then is to minimise slip and trip hazards, at the moment I'm using normal water to mop the floor. That takes 30 minutes to dry. So there's a 30-minute window where there's a slip hazard. Now I know why I'm doing it. Okay, well, I could use this chemical instead, and that dries instantly. So that 30 minutes risk zone disappears. But he would never suggest that if he didn't know why he was doing the job.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's about trust as well, isn't it, Helen? It's about trusting that person to do the best that they can. And that's pretty high, isn't it?
Oh yeah. I'm gonna get a flood.
Just crossed a bridge where the water's about to touch the bridge. Hoping we can get back to
getting the wellies, get the welly boots out.
Let's talk about trust. Let's talk about trust and metrics. Right. So I've talked to other people on this show about metrics. When we don't have trust, often, and I've been to these meetings, people turn up to meetings with green SLAs and green KPIs because they're scared of the truth. It also compounds that silo mindset, doesn't it? Where people in organisations look after themselves, we call it covering the backsides. And what that means is there's less collaboration, there's less joint ownership of objectives, and ultimately lower productivity. So what's your experience around that element of trust and communication?
So I think this also comes back to putting those reports and KPIs in context. You're right, that data is very important to give feedback. Are things progressing the way that is expected by the employee, by the manager, by the board? But you do need to give that context. So let's come back to our NASA cleaner. So his KPI could be, you've got to mop that floor twice a day. And that's your core task. And as long as you do that, a report comes out every day. It says you clean the floor twice a day, job done. But why are you doing that? Well, you're doing that to try and reduce down the slips, trips, hazards, and accidents. Okay, well, why don't we show that employee the overall NASA health and safety stats every month? So he can see, okay, he can take a pride or see, I contributed to that. There's been no accidents this month and I did my bit. It's how does he fit into the bigger picture? It isn't just, I've done my job. It's okay, how have I contributed to that bigger goal?
And that sort of having the data and the openness around the data is really important as well. There's a really old book called Maverick by a wonderful author called Ricardo Semler. Worthwhile watching on TED Talks. So he had an engineering works in South America, and he taught his engineers how to read financial data so they would understand the health of the business.
Yeah.
And it gave them more engagement. It became part of their business. You know, they were intrinsically motivated to see better results. Whereas I think often, I find organisations, they sort of use their stick and carrot, don't they?
Yeah.
Financial rewards and extrinsic motivation.
Yeah.
But Ricardo's approach was fascinating, really useful, and built huge engagement.
Yeah. And also I think, those KPIs, it has to be two-way as well. Just making sure we're not going to get run over.
Yeah, no, we're good.
Crash.
We're good.
No, looking good.
If it gets a nice view of the side of my face, we'll let this little motor scooter go past. I won't call it a motorbike, it's an easy rider. He's riding easy as well.
He's riding very easy, taking his time.
Yeah, he's hitting those corners.
Safety first.
Absolutely. We do not condone any kind of speeding on this show.
Yeah, we've now seemed to pick the busiest side road in the village.
We're good.
We're good to go. So yes, I guess coming back to the KPIs. So as much as it's the discussion between the manager and the employee, have you hit your numbers? It should also be as much, and this is what we did with your numbers. This is why you did it.
Yeah.
And I'll come off my my mopping NASA analogy now, get a bit more current. So I guess the Monday equivalent is a lot of people I speak to, their role is extracting data, providing reports.
Yeah.
And they're like the mop example, they're told, extract this data, put it in this format and send it to this person.
Yeah.
No context as to why, what it's for, how it's used. Was it the optimum format? Was it right?
Yeah.
It's just, well, that's the job. And even the next layer up may not even have those answers. Even if you ask, well, was it right? Well, I don't know, because, it went up the line and heard nothing back, so I assume it was right.
It's a really good point, that, Howard. And just, sorry to cut across you, but just a recent organisation I've worked with, really interesting, because they spent, every month, they went through the data that was a month old.
Oh, speed camera. Here we go.
Yeah, we're good.
We're good.
So, every month they went over historic data.
Yeah.
And questioned why they hadn't met the targets for that month by going through historic data. No forecasting, no looking ahead. So it's a bit like me driving using the rearview mirror.
Yeah.
It's not helpful. I think it's really important that data is linked to decision making.
Yeah.
And that decision making is linked to purpose, vision, goals.
Yeah.
And often I find, don't know if you found this, I find a massive disconnection there.
Definitely. And again, the people on the ground doing the work often have more understanding, usually have more understanding than the board of what's going on.
Yeah.
So again, if you give them the context, they can actually suggest a better way to provide those answers. It might be, actually the board are asking for the wrong numbers.
Yeah.
Because things have changed, or that doesn't quite give them the full picture. Again, it's all around this context. And I'll give you another example. So I've been playing around a lot with artificial intelligence bots. ChatGPT. Yeah. Love it. It's absolutely revolutionized everything I do. But similar to a human, the more context you give it, the better response you get out of it.
Yeah.
So if you say to ChatGPT, I'm an IT manager, here's my job history, write me a CV, it will write you a fairly bland CV with a few assumptions.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you add the context, and I aspire to be an IT director in 5 years, it'll write you a completely different document with that in mind. So, that's just giving a bit more context. And it's interesting when you're going through writing these prompts, it does force you to really dig into the detail of why am I doing this?
So that's interesting. So for me, that's the map and not the territory.
Yeah.
Okay, so it hasn't got the tacit knowledge. And one of the things I think that is really important in bridging the gap between the board and the shop floor, the frontline worker, the most important worker, the one that engages the customers usually, is around communication and engagement. You know, that sort of real deep understanding of why we're doing this, but also to be valued.
Yeah.
To have sufficient empowerment to do the job, the best job they can, provide them the right tools. But let's talk about that communication piece, because I think that's really important. And you'll have done a lot of that in your previous roles.
Yeah.
How do you go about deeply engaging people and getting them to understand, you know, what the organisation is doing, and for them to feel impassioned to deliver the best they can?
Sure. Okay. Well, I think over 30 years, I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I'll start with the bad and work backwards to the good.
Okay.
So I guess the worst case scenario is where there's nothing. You know, you walk into an organisation, there's no goals, there's no targets. People are just coming in, doing a shift.
Yeah.
Learning from their colleagues, learning from handover notes from the person that came before and has left.
Yeah.
So they just don't know what they're doing, why they're doing it. They're just getting through the day.
Yep.
Then I've worked in businesses where, larger businesses, interestingly, where there's been very little top-down strategy and goal communication, but human beings are innovative, and you find that at division and team level, they create their own.
Yeah.
So you go in and each different teams diligently set its own goals, its own targets, just so they've got something to work to.
Yeah.
And there's good and bad in that. Obviously, there's good that, well, they've got some structure in there, but of course, you know, they're not joined up. They're all pulling in different directions. They're duplicating efforts.
Yeah. Could be the, you know, target themselves to drive at 70 miles per hour for the next hour, but they're going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely that. Yeah, the target is drive at 70 miles an hour for the next hour, but actually the group goal is to cut fuel costs.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's they're actually going against the group goal, but it's not been communicated. Then I guess coming to the good. So I've worked in places where it has been communicated very well. So literally where goals are set every year by the board, they're aligned to the overall strategy. People can see why those goals are there, what they're for, and they're communicated down on a regular basis, even down to there's posters on the walls that are changed every year. They're embedded in the appraisal system. Everyone can see how their targets are aligned back to those company goals and why they're important.
And I intend to, when I work with clients, tend to encourage more around daily communication, leadership storytelling, visibility, being on the floor. Things like purpose chats. So, you know, if you're working in an environment that's highly repetitive, to ensure that you know, on a interval basis, maybe 2 or 3 times a day, we talk through what we're trying to achieve today, this week, and this month, so that there's some way of sort of being able to understand the short-term goal along with the long-term. So sometimes, you know, when we try and communicate complex things 5 years out, it just isn't going to land. So we have to break that down. We have to make it simple. We have to engage people at their level. That means, you know, getting to the shop floor, talking to people, sharing that passion. And then, as you say, you know, not just building it into appraisals, but building it into daily updates. You know, one of the things I'm a huge fan of is the plan, do, check, adjust cycle. Or some people call it plan, do, check, act. And it comes from a methodology called Lean. I talk a lot about Lean on this podcast. And what it allows people to do is, on a daily basis, have dialogue around performance, around quality, cost, and delivery. And it gives people ownership. You know, it builds that intrinsic motivation, which is what we really need in high-performing organisations. I think you're right. It's trying to get that real balance. I mean, it's, you know, even if it's a quick 5 minutes every morning, just to, one, set the tone for the day, and two, be on top of any issues that have arisen, any obstacles, any problems, and to give staff, you know, an opportunity to have their say.
which again can be a challenge depending on your team size.
Yes, absolutely. And with remote working as well, it's not as though we're always in the same place together to share that. So, using Teams or Zoom, whatever people use, having electronic update boards and information and sharing that regularly is really important, isn't it? And making it simple. Right, that's the other thing, is making those complex ideas or strategies simple to understand and digest. Do you know that the average reading age in the UK is about 11? I worked with a client last year. I brought on an amazing person, and I'm going to name drop Eddie Phillips as an artist. And Eddie creates some fantastic posters and visuals. And that kind of stuff really, you've got to keep it fresh. But it really does help communicate what we're trying to achieve in an organisation. Yeah,
absolutely. I think visuals are key. In fact, I've just got an app called SketchWow.
Oh, right.
And it is freeform sketching, which then turns it into a PDF. And I've started using that on a few LinkedIn posts, and it's quite effective actually. So I do have the drawing skills of a 5-year-old, but it's certainly original. No one else can say they've got the same picture. But you're right, that's key, and that's probably a subject for a whole other discussion we'll have down the line in terms of how do you package information up these days for people in this digital age that's quick and easy to digest compared to before.
And the different cohorts, so you've got people that understand digital data, some people that still want to read reports and use paper.
Yeah, absolutely. And that could be, as you say, different cohorts, age groups, different cultures. As I say, I've worked all over Europe, Anglo-Saxon countries, Latin countries, East European countries. Again, all very different ways of digesting data, different ways of interpreting data, of asking questions around that data. So all that has to be considered as well. And I think you do have to tailor it to your audience. You can't just give everyone the same detailed view, the same bland targets. Again, I've seen that in objective setting, and especially for appraisals where, the target comes down, increase sales by 10%. Everyone's goal is increase sales by 10%, rather than, okay, well, how can you contribute to that in your role? I'm not
credit
in sales.
Controls.
Yeah, exactly.
Goal is to prevent more fraud by 10%.
Yeah. So, that's tailoring goals and targets to each person's role. It's a lot of effort. Now, what I would say is these days, I think with AI, it's a lot easier. A lot of that stuff, it can be chucked into ChatGPT. I was playing around with that. That'll, you can put goals in and you can say, okay, I was playing around with that the other day. The goal is increase sales by 10%. How would you cascade this goal down to your sales team, your finance team, your ops team? How can they contribute to that? And it was a pretty good first step. So if you put a bit more data in around how those departments work in your business, you can quickly do that and set individual targets. And that really, I think, is very powerful then if you can do that and link it back up to the company goals at the top.
So you mentioned individual targets. How would you link that then to shared objectives and shared goals? Because one of the things that I've found in organisations is where there's a lack of a shared end outcome, a shared mission, vision and goal, organisations drop into individual performance targets. And what that means is people go off in different directions. As we've just sort of joked about, credit has one target, sales has another. Finance team has a target, HR team has a target. In fact, there's a fantastic example of an organisation that I work with where they boasted about their graduate recruitment. And it was an award-winning program of graduate recruitment. And they recruited these very bright young people and then gave them Excels to fill in and suffered a 75% in-year turnover. I mean, that's a classic of not speaking to the operation, understanding what the operation needs, whilst trying to meet a target of recruiting graduates and winning awards. So it all has to work together. An organisation is a system at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's a great example of wasted talent, because you're not giving people context. And you're right, I've seen that. I've seen businesses that devise very sophisticated graduate recruitment schemes to bring in the best, but the best expect the best, and then it doesn't live up to their expectations. They're not given any autonomy. They're not given any input. They're just told to sit there and do a task, and then rotate every 6 months and do another task, and you'll gradually learn the business. Well, they've got so much talent and energy and enthusiasm at that point when they come in. That's when you need to tap it.
Has to be nurtured, doesn't it? Has to
Absolutely.
be nurtured.
That I think that's key. And I've been working with some guys recently, young guys, these guys, early 20s, in a marketing business, and they were so talented, so switched on, so driven, focused. They had goals, objectives. They knew where they wanted to go. Real drive, so that's what you need.
That's interesting. There's a stat there. Recent report, HR report, suggests that when graduates aren't engaged, you're 50% more likely to lose talent.
Yeah.
But we started this conversation with NASA and the guy with the broom.
That's right.
Putting a man on the moon.
Yeah.
How does that link to what you've just said about these young graduates? I mean, do those concepts still have validity in this day and age?
I think even more so. I think now the challenge is a lot of organisational structures have flattened.
Yeah.
So therefore, you tend to have a bigger gap between the people coming in at the bottom and the board. You don't have so many layers of management to filter that message down and refine that message to the audience. Again, that's led to bigger teams. So you now find managers are managing very large teams on top of doing a day job themselves. So the team doesn't get the attention, and as we said in a team meeting, doesn't get the chance to input, because if there's 4 of you there,
yes,
and you've got a 30-minute meeting, you can all input. If there's 30 of you there in a 30-minute meeting, you're just going to sit there and take stuff in.
Yeah, it's really interesting that actually, Howard, that as layers have flattened, perhaps organisations have cut costs and they've reduced the management structure.
Yeah.
What I'm finding with the companies I work with is that what happens is the managers end up doing.
Yeah.
So they become highly paid administrators, or what that means, however, is that it takes them away from what they're there to do, which is manage effectively. And managing effectively, I know management has been a swear word over the recent years and decades, where we've all been sort of banging the gong about leadership. But actually, good management makes the machine work and work effectively.
Yeah.
What I'd be really interested to learn from you is, how have you seen that take effect in organisations you've worked in, where the organisation structure's flattened, there's fewer managers, and actually there's now a gap because people aren't managing. They're not helping the work.
Yeah.
They're busy doing all the other admin stuff that a manager has to do, HR, appraisals, reports, etc.
Yeah. Well, I think, ironically, we're now in a world where people crave more feedback, and in every area other than work, they're constantly getting feedback. Every app you've got now, tracks you and gives you updates and tells you how long you've spent looking at your screen and how many steps you've done and what was your heart rate when you were sleeping. So the world's got very used to receiving feedback.
Yeah.
But ironically, when you get into the workplace, you're often starved of that feedback. So I think it's exacerbated it, made it even worse.
Do you think there's a matter of push-pull as well? So the data you're talking about is push.
Yeah.
But actually, creating curiosity and pull within your workforce is a very different way of doing things. It requires a different technique of communication and engagement, and the ability to hear and listen.
Yeah.
Rather than just receive data points.
Yeah, I think so. I think people, again, I've seen various different ways it's done. I mean, personally, I always had an open door policy.
Yeah.
And I think I gained a lot, and I think staff gained a lot from having access to me. It's a balance. I mean, you don't want them there all the time because you'd never get anything done. But but if you encourage people to come and see you when they've got any thoughts, concerns, ideas, that's a rich vein of information that you're getting on what's happening in your business. You're learning about problems in real time, way before the KPIs come out.
Yeah.
So I think that that feedback, walking the floor, being visible is very, very key. Now, harder when you're looking after multiple offices in different countries, but I think as we said, regular video calls, regular visits to offices when you can, to get one, so people feel a connection with the business, and two, again, gives them an opportunity to give you questions, get feedback, voice their thoughts.
And the reality is, Howard, is that when you're setting the example, your management structure will be there to support you in reaching out to the other teams, whether international teams, etc. But you've got to set that expectation. This is how we do stuff around here. This is how I behave as a leader, and therefore, the minimum our people should expect is this way of working. I think that's what sort of embeds these behaviours and expectations. I think that whether you're a frontline worker, a middle manager, or a leader, you have expectations of those above you, below you, and beside you. And those should be communicated as well, so that we all know how we work together and how we get the best out of each other.
Yeah. And I think, the next generation of new staff, those in their 20s now, have been brought up with a culture of questioning. So they're quite comfortable to question and challenge, which is great. We need to embrace that and give them that opportunity, and give them more data so they can, provide more value to the business and ultimately to themselves, and they have a more enriching role. So
for the people watching this, both admiring our jumpers but listening to the conversation, they may be thinking, Howard's a really good chap, he's making some sense here. What are the 2 or 3 things that they can do starting tomorrow to sort of bridge that gap between board and frontline staff?
So I think context is very important. So, communicate to your staff what are the company goals and why. Communicate the message simply and clearly. It's very important. As we were mentioned earlier on about how do people digest information these days. And I came across a new acronym the other day I hadn't heard of. So TLDR. You heard that one? TLDR? Too long, didn't read. And that's now morphed into, they use it for summary. Give me the TLDR. So it's all around, short, sharp, concise communication that's clearly digestible. No waffle. It's clear what's got to be done. So that's key. And then as we're coming back to measurements, KPIs, make sure that's two-way. So if you're collecting this KPI information, you're tracking your staff, give them the big picture. Then that consolidated data, again, at company level, as much as you can, feed that back down So people don't just know, back to our friend mopping the floor at NASA. He knows that he's mopped his floor twice a day, every day this week, and he's got 100% hit on his KPI. But, it's so much more powerful if you can say, okay, and look at that, that's fed into no accidents on the health and safety report this month. Therefore, there's been no downtime on the mission, therefore the mission's on target. So how much more powerful is that to say, take some pride, look, I did my bit in that, I helped that happen, I didn't just mop the floor, sweep the floor, I helped keep this business accident free. And the same with, today employees, that data, what was that report used for? What value did it add? How's that helped shape the direction of the business?
Yes.
You've done your bit in achieving that goal of increasing client numbers, client retention, whatever it is, breaking into a new market. You actually get that feedback, and that can be directly linked back to the work you did.
Brilliant.
So it's giving people that praise, that positive feedback.
Yes.
That they've done a good job.
Howard, I just wanted to recap on a few things, if you don't mind. So, once we've talked through the objectives and shared those, how do you go about embedding things? So, is there more that we can do?
Yes, I mean, it's a very good point. It's very important to make sure that even though you think you've clearly communicated your goals, that they have been interpreted and understood at the other end in the same way. And I'll give you an example of that, where I remember we were producing a particular risk policy for the business, and we were talking about high risk scenarios. And a high risk scenario was where you've got movable chattels and property.
Okay.
So, i.e., if an asset can be moved around, there's a higher risk. It could be lost, stolen, etc., etc. So we interpreted that as movable chattels and property. Property, as in it's a possession.
Yes.
But some people in the business interpreted that as property, as in buildings.
Yes.
So therefore, they went through, and anything that involved a building was designated high risk.
Okay.
All around just a misunderstanding or misinterpretation of that word property.
Okay.
So, and it's like, how did you get to that? Oh, okay, I can see. But those kind of things, you're right, it is key to replay that back and get the staff to make sure,
how do you know they understand what you're asking them to do?
So, I think depending on the complexity of the objective, I've used workshops with staff, training sessions, feedback loops. So get them to replay back to their managers. How do they interpret it? Do some scenarios. Okay, in this scenario, what would you do? How would you interpret that? Just to make sure they really understand. And once you've got that understanding in place, then it's just repetition. And then it's regularly reinforcing the same message once you're sure it's clear. And that's regular communication. So I would say really weekly email updates to your staff, what's going on. Make sure those goals are the backbone of the communications that you're putting through to your staff. So it is reinforced. In fact, I've even seen them put on posters and stuck on the walls everywhere. I even worked in one place where they produce these lovely Perspex desktop ornaments every year with the goals on them, which it's probably a bit excessive.
That embeds it, right? Embeds it. That's
absolutely
the important thing. We did that with the kids in their bedrooms. We put all the certificates up on the wall so they could see their achievements. I think it's the same thing as sort of visualizing what you're trying to achieve.
Absolutely, because again, staff are maybe doing some other great stuff, but if it doesn't align with the objectives of the business, then okay, well that's great, but that wasn't the priority. And interestingly, this week I've put a post out on LinkedIn around SWOT analysis. And again, looking at that and the way that most people do the SWOT wrong. The original idea behind the SWOT was you focus on the opportunities and threats first. Then you assess your strengths and weaknesses in relation to the opportunities and threats.
Yeah.
Because you may have a great strength, but if that doesn't help with an opportunity or minimize a threat,
Yeah.
doesn't matter. That's not
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
You know, you can pat yourself on the back, but that's not going to move the business forward.
Yeah.
And historically, most people have done the strengths and weaknesses first, which starts off with a lot of mutual back patting. And then the opportunities, the threats are almost an afterthought,
Yeah.
where it's the same with employees. You know, you may have done some great work, but if that doesn't help move the business forward and meet this year's goals,
Yes.
that's great. But, you know, that's wasted effort for the business.
So we're just driving through Wollaston. We've just been to the Nag's Head for a nice lunch. Really, what I'd like now, Howard, if you don't mind, is just to summarise for the listeners key points from your perspective, and then before you finish off, just tell us what you've been up to.
Sure. Okay. So in summary then, really it's clarity, dialogue, reinforcement and monitoring. I should have come up with a clever acronym for that, but anyway, maybe for next time. So really clarity of message. So what are your goals? Make sure you can articulate them clearly and simply for your staff. Send that message out. So make sure that message is clearly sent, is received. Get the feedback from your staff. What have they understood from it? Reinforcement. So then after that, make sure that on a regular basis, that message is still going out and being reinforced, and you're providing updates for your staff, and monitoring. So are you getting the results you're expecting from those goals, and feed that back to the staff as well. So that's the summary.
Awesome. And just very quickly, you know, people want to get some more advice and support. What are you up to?
Sure.
And
so
how did they
now,
reach you?
yeah. So I've left the corporate world now. I'm focusing on trying to build up a portfolio of other things. So in this sphere, I've got some non-exec director roles that I'm doing at the moment. I am working with some businesses on business turnaround, doing some business health checks, just helping businesses get an overview, kick the tires.
Yep. And what size business are you working with at the moment?
I think the sweet spot is between 50 and 500 staff.
Yeah.
Is the key area where
So medium-sized businesses.
Medium-sized businesses where we can quickly add some value and benefit for busy executives.
Brilliant.
But, you know something needs to be done or would benefit, but just haven't got that skill or expertise or time in-house. So that's where I can come in and help out.
Awesome. And you're on LinkedIn?
I'm on LinkedIn, yep. So hopefully you'll put the link at the end of this podcast so people can link up with me. But yep, Howard Montagu. There aren't many Howard Montagues on there. So sort me out, find me out. And yeah, it'd be great to link up with anyone.
There you go. The one and only Howard Montagu.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Driving productivity.